Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Amy Fogg, and she's here today to talk about some of the soldiers who are buried in the Andre Chapelle Cemetery in Belgium.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
This is the first time we're actually meeting, but
Yes.
we've actually been in contact now for about 2 or 3 years. You've been on my radio show,
Yes.
and it's great to actually finally meet you.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about these men in this very special place in Belgium. It is called Andre Chapelle American Military Cemetery, and it contains the remains of 7,992 American soldiers who were killed in World War II. And these men were killed during the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest, the Battle of Aachen, and in air raid operations over the region. In addition to the 7,992 men who actually rested this cemetery, there's also the names of the 450 men who are missing in action. And their names are on the walls of the Missing, which is at the front entrance to the cemetery.
Now, you've really taken this project under your wing because not only have you written about it, but you've been there. You've been there more than once, right?
Just once. I would like to go more than once, yes, of course, but just once. It all started in 2009. I was looking where my great uncle was resting, and I found him. He's at this cemetery in Belgium. So after researching him for a year, my husband and I decided that it was best and most appropriate to visit the cemetery. We traveled his route of march with a German World War II vet, and we were the first family to ever visit the cemetery and my Uncle Paul's cross. And it was during this visit that I learned of the project of the trying to collect the stories and photos of all these men.
Right. So who was your uncle?
My Uncle Paul, he was Paul Lavoie from Nashua. He was my paternal grandmother's younger brother, and the family never really spoke of him just because it was difficult to speak about Paul. He was the only one of my ancestors who fought in World War II who did not return home. And I was actually working on a Holocaust project in Lithuania where the thought crossed my mind that perhaps I should find Paul. And once I found Paul's location, the quest really turned from me finding answers to letting Paul tell his story. So after my husband and I and my aunt and an uncle visited the cemetery, I contacted an associate at the cemetery and told her, if you send me the names of the New Hampshire soldiers, because we're from New Hampshire, I can see what I can do. If I can collect these stories, find families, relatives, photos of these men.
Right. Okay. This is your uncle, your great uncle.
Yes.
And
yes.
Who did he belong to? As in what group?
He served with the 78th Division, the 309th Infantry Regiment, Company C.
Right.
And he was killed in action on February 10th, 1945, right outside of Schmidt, Germany.
Right.
So he was killed in action a month before his 22nd birthday.
Right. And so it was it was kind of his death that made this project all happen decades later, because this is the 70th anniversary since the end of World War II.
Right. It was really Uncle Paul, who started this whole process. During the plane ride home, my husband turned to me and he said, "Well, why don't you research the other New Hampshire men?" And I thought he was a little crazy to propose such a thought to me, because I was pregnant at the time. And I thought, well, I've spent this last year researching Paul. We visited Paul. We've walked his route of march. I felt as though I was complete with Paul, and I guess I was not.
Okay, and then here's a cover of your book.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've researched now for many years, and you have this book now. And what is the book about?
The book and the project, and this is what I tell people, Scott, the project is a celebration of life, and it's acknowledgement of men who served and who did not return home. And so what I try to do, there's 25 men from Vermont who are buried at this particular cemetery in Belgium. And what I try to do is I try to locate family, friends, any sort of community member who may remember these men. And I'm looking for details other than what I can find in public records, such as what they like to eat, what their personality was, their goals, their hopes, if they were married, their aspirations. And so basically the project is put in a face and a personality to the name on each of these crosses.
I think that's how we met.
Yes.
I think you contacted me because I have the Northland Journal, and then I put, if I recall right, I think I put one of your articles in that helped generate some information for you.
Yes.
Right.
There's actually 35 pairs of brothers who rest at this cemetery, including 2 from Vermont.
Right.
And one of the pairs from Vermont is actually from the Northeast Kingdom, the Bishop brothers.
Right.
They are originally from Newport and Derby, and they are Sergeant Norman Bishop and Staff Sergeant Lawrence Bishop.
And so let's go back to the cemetery itself. And this is a photo of your great uncle's marker.
Yes.
And there's people who've adopted
Yes.
his, and did you meet the people who adopted the plot?
I did. We did. It's their names are Jacques and Anne-Marie Corman from Belgium. And the program is a fantastic program because anybody can sign up to adopt these men. And there was actually a big adoption ceremony on the 17th of September. And those individuals who have adopted these men, they receive a certificate of adoption. So these adopters, some of them like to be called patrons or foster parents. They adopt and they visit the crosses. They place flowers, and the men, the soldiers, become part of their families. And I have PFC Lewis Connolly from Vermont, from Jamaica, Vermont. I just met his daughter last weekend. I spent Saturday with her, and her and I have only had the relationship of talking on the phone and letter writing for the past 3 years. And her dad has been adopted by a 10-year-old boy. And so, which is fantastic because he's 10 years old, and so he will be taking care of her father's cross for a very, very long time.
And this is a view of the whole cemetery?
Yes, and you can see the front columns contains the names of the missing in action.
Right. Now, why do the residents do this? Because even over here, after a generation, even a lot of times people even forget about their own relatives who are buried.
Right.
So why are these people in Belgium taking care of these?
And it's not just in Belgium; it's also in the Netherlands and in France. It's a sign of gratitude. It's a sign of thank you. They view these men as their liberators. And it's not just members of that generation who adopt these men. As I just mentioned, it's members from this generation, and it's families who adopt these men. And they look at it, like I said, as a sign of gratitude and sincerity. And when an individual adopts a soldier, that soldier becomes part of that individual's family. And when we met the Cormans, the couple who have adopted my Uncle Paul, we became part of their family. We were instantly part of their family. And they have a photo of him in their home So it's just it's a beautiful program. It's a remarkable program, and I always tell families back here in the States that their loved ones, their dads or their brothers or their uncles or whomever, they're being well taken care of, and they're receiving a lot more attention there at that cemetery than they would be
Right.
here in the States, unfortunately and sadly.
No, that's true. You know, you were saying there's a lot of brothers that are buried there. You know, if you think about that, it must have been bad enough losing one child in the war, but to lose a brother or well, two kids, that must have been horrible. But back to the Bishop brothers, they were from Newport.
Yes.
And you were able to track down some of the living relatives. Well, first of all, who were the brothers again?
They are Private Lawrence Bishop and Sergeant Norman Bishop.
Right. And here are their, this is where their resting
Yes.
place is. And, well, let's show the photos of the two brothers. Now, who did you speak to in the family about
Sure,
these
sure.
two
These-
brothers?
Well, I located their sister Noreen, who lives in Coventry,
Right.
and I visited her house to interview her. And what's interesting about these two brothers is that they were killed in action 7 days apart from each other.
Now, which one died first?
It was Norman who died first on December 14th, and he was actually buried in France. And then Lawrence was killed on December 21st. And he was placed in the temporary cemetery right there in Belgium. And so the family decided in 1948 to have the two brothers rest side by side in Belgium. And so Noreen describes, she remembers very vividly receiving notification that her first brother had died. She was with her mom, they were eating dinner. And then a few weeks later, after Lawrence died, they were eating dinner again, and they received notification that Norman had passed away. I'm sorry, that Lawrence had passed away.
Right. Do you know if the first brother or the second brother to die, did he know that his brother had already passed?
I don't know, and Noreen did not know either, and I don't know.
How did Noreen say her family coped with not only one tragedy but a double tragedy? How did they go forward? What was their philosophy?
Sure. Well, Noreen's father had already passed, so he was not alive at the time that his two boys were killed. And Noreen said that her mother, Norabella, was just devastated, and she was never the same after. Norman was her caregiver, her caretaker, and she depended on him. And as I stated, Noreen just said that her mother never recovered from losing both of her sons.
Were they her only sons?
I believe so, yes.
Right. Now, what did you learn? Because you were saying in addition to going to like dates and names and everything, you wanted to know about these people. What did you find out about the two brothers?
What I found about the two brothers was Noreen remembers that her brother Norman had a slight temper, and Lawrence was more of the introvert. They both liked fishing and playing baseball. They were both extremely hard workers. She just remembers just them being just fantastic individuals. They never caused problems. They were respectable. They respected others. They were just all around great men to have as brothers.
They were probably like a lot of World War II veterans of the time. Today the people who go off to serve in the military, if they haven't traveled, and a lot of them have already, they at least know there's a world out there. But World War II veterans, a lot of times, if you're talking about Orleans County, Vermont, a lot of those people, this was their world.
Right.
They hadn't, they may have known that existed over there, but I've interviewed dozens of World War II veterans, and they will tell you that here they are in the safety and countrysides of Orleans County. Then a few months later, they're over in the war zone,
Right.
and sometimes in places they never knew existed.
Right.
But were they probably like that, where they hadn't traveled that much?
I'm assuming, yes, that they had not traveled much. However, the interesting thing about where Henri Chapelle is in relation to the landscape of the Northeast Kingdom is that it's very much similar. When my husband and I were over in Belgium and we visited the cemetery and the surrounding region, we both remarked, well, this reminds us both of the Northeast Kingdom, not realizing, and at the time I didn't know anything about the Bishop brothers from Newport, Vermont. So a part of me wonders and thinks that perhaps they found some sort of comfort and recognition in the landscape that must have reminded them of home.
Right. What's interesting too is like over the years I've interviewed some of the German veterans who've actually moved to the Northeast Kingdom, and the parts of Germany, and they said looked like this, and that's why they chose to settle here, because they left Germany because it was in a state of chaos at the time. And they settled here just to feel like they were closer to home.
Yeah, a little bit of home. And I always tell family members too, that the surrounding region where the cemetery is, it's very beautiful.
Right.
It's, like I said, just like the Northeast Kingdom.
Now, when you approach the family members, because I know I've been approached by different groups, research and things, including from Europe, and you kind of really never... You have to kind of feel out, is this for real?
Yes.
And because there's so many scams out there. And how were you received when you contacted different family members?
Sure. Well, when I was working on the New Hampshire names, the very first mistake I made, and I've learned from this mistake, was when I located a daughter, I called her first instead of sending her a letter, and I caught her. She was obviously not prepared to receive a phone call from a stranger asking if she had a father who was buried in Belgium. And of course she did, and the relationship was fantastic that I have with her. But I learned from that mistake to first send a letter. I explained myself in the letter, and then I mail the letter, and then I wait about 2 weeks. And then if I have not received a phone call or an email or some sort of reply to my letter, then I call. Then I call the individual. And most families, are very, very fantastic. They're wonderful, and they're very excited. But it also brings up a lot of difficult memories and painful experiences that you would think that even after all this time would not be so difficult for them, but it is. And some daughters or children, orphans, have said that they have never forgotten their father, and it feels like he just died. Their fathers have just died the other day, so the grief is still very, very
Right.
fresh, very fresh.
What's interesting is the guy I graduated with from high school, Pierre Gervais, who was from Island Pond, he's now Colonel Gervais in the U.S. Army, and one of his missions was when he was earlier on in his career, was to go to Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, he led MIA and POW missions, with permission of the countries, and they would dig up remains of fallen Americans who died in those countries. And he was saying that there's also a list of family members who do not want to be contacted if their fallen family members are found, because they don't want to, they know they're gone, and they don't want it to all have to come back. And I found that interesting. Did you find anybody who just did not want to hear from you?
Well, there was one family. It was the family of PFC Ted Hall, and Ted is originally from Jefferson, Maine, and he moved to Springfield, Vermont, in search of employment. And there he met his wife Helen, and they married, of course. And their plan was to move to Maine and have a farm in Maine.
Right.
Of course, Ted was killed in action, and Helen remarried, and I located Helen's family. Of course, Ted and Helen did not have any children, and I located Helen's family, and it was her son who said, that was my mom's first husband, and and I really don't have anything to offer, any kind of information to offer. Again, he stated, that was his mom's first husband, and and that he wasn't really part of their life after World War II. But and that was his choice. It wasn't a wrong choice. It wasn't a wrong answer, but it just was not part of his life.
Another group that hasn't forgotten about these men who were buried there or buried in any place or who died in action are the veterans I've interviewed. Some of them, when you think of World War II veterans, you think, they were supposed to come home, suck it up, and move on. Right. And everybody says that's what they did. No, a lot of them actually, they've suffered too with post-traumatic stress. There's one guy I interviewed, Paul Moffat of Newport. He's still alive in his 90s. Saw some of the fiercest combat and has shrapnel in his body, and he still sheds his tears for these people that he watched get killed. And so there still are people who still remember them. But I think it's great what you're doing, because there's a couple things I think of. Is there's not I can pretty much guess your age, but I assume you're in your 30s. It's nice to see somebody your age coming up who is as interested in this as I am. And you know what? It's statistically, it's really true, and I think you'll agree that there's more men interested in history, especially World War II history.
Right.
That's how come you fascinated me, just because you are so interested in it. But then we even, kind of in a strange way, share a little similarity. You have a family member who lives in the house that I used to visit my great uncle and great aunt in Irisburg.
Yes, that would be my uncle, my aunt and uncle. And when we realized that connection, right, we said, "Oh, this is too funny."
Yeah, because that was my Uncle Abe's house.
Okay.
Abe and Mary's house.
Oh, that's.
And I only have vague memories of them, but I remember, if I recall right, the house was on one side. I think the barn was on the other.
Yes, the barn is on the other side.
And the barn, by the time I arrived, was no longer used for milk. It was used, for some reason, he had it filled with goldfish, big goldfish. So it was just funny, because you're from where?
I'm from Guilford, New Hampshire, the Lakes region.
Right. So even though you're from there, we share this little.
Yes.
We share this little bond in Irisburg.
Yes, and my uncle, Roger Gagnon, my aunt is Joanne. Right. My uncle Roger, he's a Vietnam vet, right, and it was a great place to have, because we would spend, my husband and our children, we would spend the weekends with Roger and Joanne at their home, and I would use their house as a base. Right. And they joined me interviewing the family of Claude Chapin Orchard in Essex. Right. And they also joined me in interviewing the family of Sergeant Jacobs, right, in Coventry. So it's been a pleasure.
This is Sergeant Jacobs.
Yes, there he is. Yes. Right. And he was, when I think about Sergeant Jacobs, I think about his wife. Right. They had I believe it was 7 children, and their last child did not survive. And I think about his wife, because Sergeant Jacobs at the time was deployed.
Right.
He was not home, and here his wife was having to deal with the loss of their child and without her husband, and having to worry about her husband overseas. But what I really would like to stress about this project, Scott, is, again, I say that this is a celebration of life. And when I write these stories, I don't focus on their causes of death. And I don't focus on the military aspect of these men, because, to be quite honest, if people are interested in the history of, let's say, the 78th Division, you can find that information online or in a book or whatnot. But what I try to focus on, as I mentioned earlier, are the men behind these names. And when I interview family members, I always tell them, don't worry too much about, giving me the details that I can find in public records. What I want to know is what do you want a stranger 50 to 75 years from now to know about your dad or your brother, your cousin, or a friend? And I tell families as well that this is their opportunity to speak on behalf of their relative, their loved one who is overseas at this cemetery, because local school children visit this cemetery quite frequently, and they stop at each cross, and they want to know who rests at that particular cross, and it's not fair to the students, to come across upon these graves and only to find out there's no information about. They're trying to honor and respect these men, and so I believe it's my duty to honor and respect these men.
Did you
as well.
Have you had the opportunity to read any of the letters they wrote home? Any of these men, because a lot of times these letters they wrote home, especially men that you may have not even or think were letter writers, some of these letters home, whether they survived, whether soldiers survived or not, some of their letters are really beautiful letters. I don't know if you've got to see any of the letters.
There's a few letters that PFC Lewis Connolly, his daughter Rosalie, she shared with me, and I included in his story. But she wrote him a letter every day, and she still has all of his letters that she keeps, and they're private, they're personal to her. But she shared a few of them that she felt, comfortable sharing with me. There's one letter that belongs to PFC Claude Chapin. It was his comrade who wrote this particular letter to Claude's brother in the 1960s. And it is just such a fantastic letter, because it describes what the GI was experiencing, what he was feeling at the time, in battle and whatnot, and it seemed to provide a lot of closure for him as a letter writer and him as a soldier. But it's one of my favorite letters, and I go back and I read the copy from time to time, just to find some kind of comfort when I think about my Uncle Paul, alone, and it provides me with some kind of comfort.
In your someday, well, maybe you've already heard of Eva Kor.
Oh, yes.
Eva's been a guest on my radio show. She also was the guest speaker at my World War II event this summer, but via Skype. And to the viewers, Eva was a concentration camp survivor of Auschwitz, and I always say it wrong. I'll never get it right. But the infamous death camp, and there were very few survivors at that death camp. But because she was a twin, she was able to survive just because they like to do experiments on them. But her work, she's doing a similar thing. she's doing a very similar thing to yours, except for she's focusing on the death camps.
Right.
But she also does something else that you do. She said too much has been done. Not too much, but a lot has been done on all the people that were, how they were killed, and the horrors of it. But so little has been done on the lives of the people. So she tries to also bring out the lives of the 6 million Jews and the millions of other people that were killed there, because and try to celebrate their lives. And she also goes one step further. She says for her and for those affected by the Holocaust, you also have to find forgiveness, not forgetting, but forgiven, because forgiven don't mean you're forgetting.
Right.
But it means that you're not going to let them hurt you anymore.
Right. And one thing I love about her is she says that it's important to forgive because it honors the memory of those, to hold on to all that hatred and animosity in some ways is like a second death to those who have already died. And for her, I really enjoy following her on her social media pages, because she's just a great example of what it means to forgive and how to forgive.
And every year she goes back with about 100 Americans to the death camps. And the two people I would love to tour the death camps with is you and her. I think it would be great to go there, because I think we, I know I'm older than you, but still we fall within the same area. We have no idea. We have no idea what that generation went through. You think about just the Americans buried at that cemetery.
Right.
Now if somebody gets killed, no disrespect to the men and women serving today, but if one person gets killed, it's on the news, in the military. Back then we had hundreds of people dying in one battle. And that the horrors that generation saw and what they were able to overcome is just amazing. Sometimes I feel like we have turned into a country of whiners.
Yes. It's interesting you say that, because I was just thinking the other day about my favorite Holocaust survivor and what he experienced and went through. And he was the only one in his family to survive. And he came to the States not knowing this family who, his great aunt and uncle who had sponsored him. And he came to the States and he found a job, and he worked hard. And I think, gosh, if Joe can live through and survive and then lead a somewhat, a normal life, then what is wrong with the rest of us, when we, victimize ourselves?
Because we don't have the latest cell phone.
Yes.
And then there was another fellow in St. Johnsbury, George Hollos, who has since passed. He was a reluctant German soldier, and because he refused to go, he was Hungarian. They put him in a punishment battalion. He was sent to Russia.
Okay.
Ill-equipped, and he was captured. Spent 7 years in a Russian gulag. And all I can think of the book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
He said to survive that, you had to find meaning. You had to celebrate every day. And while other people, he said, while other people were feasting on the dead, he did not resort to cannibalism. But he didn't criticize it. He just said, that wasn't what he was going to do. And he was another man who was very, very much into, you just could not allow that to burden you down. You had to focus on today.
Right. And you had to have a reason, and you had to stay positive to find. And when I lived in Russia as an exchange student, I just turned 17, and I visited a mass grave right outside of St. Petersburg, and it was the victims of Hitler's siege on St. Petersburg. And it was just row after row after row of victims of individuals, and that was my very first experience with mass graves and with what happened during World War II, and so. And then I got involved with this project, and when after I finished Vermont, I thought I would be done. I really sincerely thought I was all done, and then I was told that I was the only American working on this project, and when I found that out, I thought, well, I really can't stop. I can't leave these others behind.
How many more do you have?
That's a very good question. I had been told a few years ago that the cemetery had approximately 1,000 stories. So there's quite a ways to go, Scott. I'm working on Maine right now. There's 54 men from Maine. Pennsylvania and New York each have about 900 men. So obviously I'm not going to be able to do those states, but I'm going to try my best. This is going to be, I believe, a lifelong project for me.
It's kind of sad, and not to condemn the schools, because schools only have so much time, especially since they have to use so much time for social stuff now, that World War II is not high on the priority anymore. It seems to be slipping away. It's like, but for the last 15 years, I've been bringing in World War II veterans into our local school, and I'm not sure if they do that anymore after the certain teacher has retired. But I used to bring in even not only the World War II veterans, but some of the war brides, and one of the German soldiers used to go in as well. And I just think that one of the many reasons your work is so important is to put faces to this war that is slowly being forgotten.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned the war brides, because my niece, she's a 6th grader, and she has a project for History Day with New Hampshire, and she selected the topic of brides. Right. So we're working on that, but it's one of those topics that just kind of gets pushed to the side. But there's so much history and just so much to learn from these individuals and these experiences. And one of the things that has really, this project, how it has impacted me, is it has changed my whole outlook on life, and I think of these families and these men and what they thought when they left home, and I think of the wives and the mothers who were left behind, and there's just so much to learn from these individuals, even after 70, that you won't find in textbooks.
I know, that's it. It's true. And the name of the cemetery again is?
It is Henri Chapelle, but it's spelled Henri, so you can call it Henri Chapelle here in the States.
Okay, what is your daughter's name?
Well, we have 3 children now, and our second daughter, her name is Chapelle.
Named after?
Yes, this place.
So it really so no matter what, you're going to remember this project even just by looking at that daughter.
Yes, and it's interesting. My oldest is she'll be 5 in November, and they're very much aware of this project. And I have a presentation tomorrow night, and they knew I was working on, all I had to say was I'm working on, a presentation, and Isabella, she's the oldest, she says, oh, about your cemetery, about these soldiers, about these men. And I thought, okay, I've succeeded, just simply because they're aware of their soldiers, and we talk about Uncle Paul as if he's, not that Belgium is not so far away. My goal is to bring them to this cemetery when they're older. Our youngest, he'll be 10 months. His name is Robert Paul. We gave him 2 first names. Robert is after my maternal grandfather, my husband's maternal grandfather, who both served in the military, and Paul, of course, is after Uncle Paul.
Now here's a question I really don't know the answer to, and I've often mulled this over, and you might be the person to ask. Is we have we honor our troops here because we were the winners.
Right.
We won the war. But I've often thought, how do the people view their soldiers who fought in that war? They were on the losing side. They were the face of evil, as in the Nazis. And I'm not saying they were, but there were a lot of German veterans were good people.
Right,
They were
right.
good people that were swept up. I've interviewed a number of German veterans, and most of them were just good people.
Right,
How
right.
how does their country? Do you know how do they recognize them, or do they?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because while we were over in Belgium and Germany, we did stop at a German World War II cemetery in Wassenaar, Germany, and it was very sad. It was very you could tell that they had not won, and it was the cemetery is taken care of by volunteers. And mixed in the cemeteries, there was no like individual crosses, and some of the stones belonged to really young men who were mixed in with older veterans, and it was just really, it was sad to see because, as you stated, not all the German soldiers were Nazis and
Right.
were ardent
Right.
supporters of Hitler. There was a group, obviously, who tried to overthrow
Right.
Hitler, and to see where they're kept, where their final resting place is, it was sad. It was sad to see.
I could imagine, because I've often thought of that is just I don't have sympathy for the Nazi cause in any way, but I just because I have like with George Hollos, who I said was a reluctant German soldier, and because he was forced against his will, he was then sent to the Russian front where he was captured. So there were people who did whatever they could, but the fact of the matter is you resisted,
Right.
you were dead.
Right.
Or you're going to Russia.
Right. I do have a friend, a Dutch friend. His name is Ben, and he travels around to take different photos of these different cemeteries, and he posts them on his website. And I do have a link to his website, that show these different cemeteries. And he goes to honor these soldiers as well because they were soldiers, and they did not really have a choice. Like you said, the alternative really was not something they wanted to take and accept and approach.
Sometimes the media, including Hollywood, they don't put they make war. I'm not saying it sounds romantic, but they don't necessarily. They're not historically accurate in the
Yes.
small details sometimes. Like, for example, is you and I have some of the same philosophies about, I will talk about the battles and everything, but I also focus on the person. Like, you don't see the media folk, talking about how most of these people, World War II veterans today, hardly there's a one who won't cry to me. Because if they actually killed people, it's not something they feel good about.
Right.
Is they talk about it because it's a release, but they don't like the idea, even though it was kill or be killed.
Right.
They still don't like it. And you don't see that on.
No, you see the like you said, the romanticized aspect of in these movies, what Hollywood glamorizes. I like to say that they rest at the cemetery, Scott, just because these men went through hell. What happened to them, and this is such a good place to just simply rest and have some peace.
Now, how can if people want to learn more about your book, more about your project, how can they learn more?
Sure. Well, they can visit my website. It's called www.theyspeak.org, and there you'll find photos and my whole overall goal of the project and the list of names. And I'm trying to put up stories. We got some stories starting to come in, and of course, the books. You can have a link to the books as well.
Right. And if you're not looking. Are you looking for any more information about Vermont
Oh,
ones?
sure. I always tell families just because the project is not the book,
Right.
and the book is not the project. The project are these men. And so if anyone has any further information about these men, certainly contact me, and I can always send it to Superintendent Bell at the cemetery, and he will certainly place it into their files.
Sitting here is, and you were talking about you have a speaking engagement. Maybe at a future time, you should. I'll host you for a live appearance, because I sometimes, I haven't done it for a while, but I've had hosted people at the Goodrich Memorial Library.
Oh, yes.
And just maybe, not only you, but maybe some of the Jacobs family or
Yes.
Bishop families would like to come, because I can't thank you enough for what you're doing, because as I said, we're kind of like sister and brothers in this history
Yes.
this history thing. Here's a question though: does your husband just put up with you, or is he truly your sidekick in this?
He is my sidekick. He is. There are times when I think, gosh, I don't think I can keep going. I feel really overwhelmed. And he'll say, well, no, you have to. You have to. My husband learned a long time ago with me, Scott, that, and I was like this when he married me, so he knew he knew what he was getting into. But no, my husband's fantastic, and he understands the magnitude of this project, not only for this generation, but for the following generations as well. So no, it's great having my husband, as my partner.
See, with my wife, she supports me 150%. She and my daughter, they do the paperwork, they do the book work, they do the nuts and bolts. But when she was in high school, she celebrated the last day of history class where she would never have to worry about history again. Then she married me. And even then, she didn't really know what she was getting into, and she didn't know that it would become life encompassing. But in
Yes.
saying that,
Yes.
she supports me 150%. And so.
Yes, and like when I started this project, I didn't know that it would become so, that I would become so involved in it with the presentations and just the emotional aspect of working with all these names and these families. Just so much grief, that's involved with these names and these families. But no, my husband and I are a team when in our family, with our children and in our marriage, and we try our best to support each other.
So beyond this project, do you have anything else you're working on?
Well, the Holocaust is always my first focus.
Right.
I have some people who contact me for help, but my focus right now 100% is on this project. But I always get a little sidetracked, with some other Holocaust projects.
I like what you're doing too. And another aspect is because I tell people, I don't want to duplicate other history that's already been done. Because there's so many great people out there who are researching. They can tell you about this. They can tell you about World War II, World War I, and this. Just about any topic in history. And so I don't want to duplicate their work, as you don't. So you're just looking. You're putting faces to these people.
Yes, this is my niche. I tried doing this with the Holocaust, the victims of the mass graves in Eastern Europe. Obviously, it was extremely difficult to do, and I feel like I have finally found my niche, my place, and my calling in life. And it's just, I'm going to try my best to be able to maintain it and to continue.
Have you ever, I know you were talking about the Holocaust, have you ever just given Eva a call? She loves to hear from people.
Oh, I probably should, yes.
I'll actually give you her contact information,
thank you.
Because she's a very determined woman. I will tell you, she speaks with that thick accent.
Yes.
And she, as I said, she's been on my show a couple times, and You will absolutely love her, and she's there's no wonder. Well, what I say is she's a tough woman. She
Yes.
is. She's determined, and I say, well, what do you expect? If you survived a death camp, you have to
Right,
be a tough
right. And
person.
You have to be focused, and that's what I tell families. No, I'm working on this project. Excuse me. And if you don't like to help, if you don't want to help, that's okay. But just kindly step aside, and just let me pass and continue on my way. So I will say one last thing. I am trying to have an elected U.S. official visit the cemetery, so that's what I'm working on as well, in conjunction with these names.
Well, we haven't had anybody visit.
Well,
or
I
have
have
we
been
not?
told that the last elected U.S. official was President Eisenhower.
Really, it's been that long.
It's been that long, and I think it's time that someone, of course, they've visited, for personal trips, but I'm looking for a senator or a congressperson a rep to visit the cemetery and just take a moment, to reflect. And because once people do visit this cemetery, it's very life changing, and it's and I'd like someone to visit and to acknowledge these men.
Okay, again, your website is
theyspeak.org, and I welcome people to visit and leave comments. And if you have any information about these men, certainly, please.
How can they contact you?
There is a contact link right there on the website as well. And we do have, They Speak does have a Facebook page, so you can, and it's open to the public, so individuals can find me on Facebook as well and contact me that way as well.
Okay, it was great having you
Thank you,
on.
Scott.
And would you consider coming up sometime and doing a presentation?
Oh, why not?
Yeah, I think it would be great to have you up. Maybe get some of the family
Yes.
members to come, because I think I know you don't feel you should be honored because you're honoring them, but I think what you're doing is absolutely great.
Well, thank you, Scott.
And I thank you for taking the initiative, because honestly, I might consider myself a fairly good researcher. I wouldn't know where to begin on this project.
Yes. Well, like I tell people, when you work with genealogy, the names just kind of do the work themselves. So, but I do say that this project it's about them, it's for them, and it's because of them, and of course I'd be happy to speak about at any place at any time. So,
okay, thank you for
thank you, Scott.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.